Really great to be here, and thank you all for being here in spite of the fact that it's game 6 of the World Series, or 5, whatever it is. I am going to talk about something relevant to San Francisco, the life of St. Francis. When I was a med student here at Stanford and during the early years of my teaching, I've taught here for 25 years now, and in both of those phases of my life, I really longed for the kind of dialogue that is being carried on through CCARE. And I really want to thank Jim for his efforts on this level. It's so important to medicine and so important to general social understanding and self-understanding of humanity. So thank you, Jim, and thank you all for coming. I understand what's so valuable about this program is its basic discussion, a genuine diversity of perspectives, so that we can think together collectively and arrive at an intelligent, thoughtful alignment with these deep currents of human existence, altruism and compassion. And it's in the spirit of that I'm going to speak about something that's probably a little uncommon for these programs, but I'm going to speak on the life of St. Francis, and of course, bringing it all back to the central themes of the program here, but in the spirit of adding another voice to that dialogue. Now, I've written quite a bit on the science of altruism and compassion, but today what I really want to do is present a broader kind of spiritual, ethical reflection on these matters. Around the time the north portal of the Cathedral of Chartres was being constructed, a wealthy young man named Giovanni Francesco di Bernardone rode out one day through the plains of Umbria beyond his home in the hilltop city of Assisi. He was well liked by his friends and well known for his extravagant frivolity, but lately he seemed strangely changed. An illness had thwarted his plans for military glory, and he was inwardly disrupted by a series of vivid dreams speaking to his deepest heart. And as he went, he came upon a poor man begging by the side of the road, and drawing closer, he could see that the man was a leper. Francis, no doubt, recoiled at the sight of this wretched and repulsive body, for he had a particular horror of leprosy, which, by the way, was common in the Middle Ages in Europe. But he stopped, he got down to give him a coin, perhaps he tossed it at his feet. And then, moved by this sorrowful scene, he turned back and embraced the man. Later he said that from that moment, all that he dreaded became for him the source of a great sweetness. He'd overcome his deepest fear and was free to love others as he knew that God loved him. He proceeded to give away everything he owned and turned his whole life to the service of the sick and the downcast for the glory of his Lord. To Francis, it was a matter of courtesy that he should never be in the presence of anyone poorer than himself. What proceeded from that tiny point in the current of time was to astonish and awaken the world to a new order of understanding. Like the living parable of the mustard seed, the smallest and seemingly insignificant became the source spring of an extraordinary transformation and renewal. Soon others joined Francis in what they called holy poverty, including a wealthy magistrate named Bernard of Quintavalli. And as one biographer has noted, for perhaps the only time in human history, 2 beggars stood in the town square giving away gold coins. Others followed, soon hundreds, then thousands, spreading all over Europe and beyond, wearing only a tattered cloak and a rope belt tied with 3 knots symbolizing the evangelical counsels of perfection, poverty, chastity, and obedience. They walked the world like the grace of God enlivening faith, reconciliation, and hope, and stirring the most ordinary lives to extraordinary exaltation. It's been said that all the threads of European civilization in subsequent centuries seem to hearken back to Francis, and he's been called the morning star of the Renaissance. But his was already a world in transition. The old static order was giving way to new social and political forms. Population and commerce were increasing, and the foundation of modern banking was building, and with it, new opportunities for wealth and power, of gain of one man over another. What is beyond doubt, however, is the profound effect Francis and his followers had on shaping the color and contour of the modern world. He has been called the first Italian poet, the inspiration of late medieval art, and the source of modern drama. But his influence was far more fundamental. He seemed to radiate all that is most liberal in the modern mood, the love of nature. He's the patron saint of ecology, by the way. The love of animals, social conscience, and compassion, but also the dangers of prosperity and property. It's as though he anticipated, at least in its spiritual outlines, what was to come, the new and open possibilities within the world, as well as the difficulties that these opportunities and fluid social realities would deliver. And for this reason, he is at once universally admired and misunderstood. In his almost childlike cheerfulness and joyful generosity, he is the most human of human beings. But in his severity of self-denial and his solitary vigils of prayer, he seems alien to the very culture he helped to create. His life is to us both familiar and distant, genial and disquieting. Yet within that seeming contradiction may be a treasury of truths most urgently needed by the modern world. If we pause to ponder the trajectory of our technological age, we are immediately struck by what the philosopher Hans Jonas described as a progressive scale of freedom and peril. Nowhere is this more evident than in the implications of our advancing comprehension and control of living nature. But biotechnology is more than a set of ingenious processes and products. It is also a conceptual and ethical outlook in assumptions about the source and significance of the natural world, and informed by aspirations and ideals of progress and human purpose. At both its foundations and practical implementations, biotechnology is about desire and human destiny. This is evident in the most directly human of its applications. And let me say from the onset, that as a physician, I greatly value the quest in our biotechnology for cures and the very great good that's being done here at Stanford Medical Center. Nonetheless, these new powers of comprehension and control open further possibilities. The traditional role of medicine has been to cure disease and alleviate suffering, to restore and sustain the patient to a natural level of functioning and well-being. The medical arts were in the service of a wider reverence and respect for the natural order of the created world. This idea was put succinctly by the Roman physician Galen when he said, "The physician is only nature's assistant." But now, with the new powers of our advancing technology, there is a new paradigm, one of liberation, technological transformation in the quest for happiness and human perfection. As biotechnology has advanced, slowly but steadily, the scope and purpose of medicine have already been extended along the gradient of our appetites and ambitions to encompass dimensions of life not previously considered matters of health, but natural human variation and limitation. From sleeping pills to diet pills to orthodontia to Rogaine, growth hormone, birth control pills, liposuction, breast augmentations, and Viagra, and more recently, Provigil, a drug that allows prolonged periods of wakefulness, and seasonale, a technological bypass to the monthly periodicity of the natural menstrual cycle. In all these ways, whether you see them as good or bad, in all these ways, we have revised the given frame of nature. Increasingly, we have come to expect from medicine not just freedom from disease, but freedom from distress, struggle, and even the constraints of a natural life process, from all that is unattractive, imperfect, or just inconvenient. And now there are proposals for projects of a more ambitious scope, for the conquest of aging, neurological fusion of humans and machines, and fundamental genetic revision and guided evolution of the human species, post-humans, transhumans, and transsapiens, technosapiens. This, by the way, is the symbol for the transhumanist society, and I've had a moderate number of Stanford students in my class from the Stanford Transhumanist Society, and they're very serious students with very deep thoughts about the idea that we should liberate ourselves from the sort of coincidences and cruelties of evolutionary processes and remake ourselves in the image of our highest aspirations. The danger, however, is immediately evident. Imagined ideals untethered from a comprehensive and coherent moral frame set the course, and desire deracinated from its natural origins, where pleasure and higher purpose are inextricably bound. Pleasure provides the motive force. In the absence of any concept of cosmic order, where the material and the moral flow forth from a single creative source, all of living nature becomes mere matter and information to be reshuffled and reassigned for projects of the human will. Yet even as we express concern, we must admit that this is not a simple matter. Disorder, disease, and death seem to be woven into the very fabric of life. And medicine itself is an intervention over and against the underlying anguish that permeates and saturates the natural world. It is our species' strength and moral imperative to aspire to a fuller flourishing of life. Francis was well aware of this. He knew these fundamental realities, for he suffered deeply from bodily ills for which he sought medical care, but ultimately, in affectionate acceptance, he called these burdens his sisters. For Francis, the whole of creation and each of its varied creatures and their distinct strengths and struggles reflected and revealed to some degree the perfection of the Creator. If all things are from one Father, then all are kin and worthy of solicitude and appreciation. It was not nature in the abstract he loved, but every differentiated being in its particularity of form and color, and each in its individuality. He spoke of brother sun and sister water, and admonished a tiny wayward wanderer, brother worm, you must not cross the cobblestones. You may get crushed beneath the wheel of a cart. This was not mere sentimentality, but a gratitude grounded in an intimate awareness of the dependency of life, whose existence flows forth in intricate unity from the wellspring of all being as a story of the deepest spiritual significance. Indeed, on his deathbed, he extended his great canticle, the Canticle of the Sun, I'm sure you all know it. On his deathbed, he extended his great canticle of creation, adding the words, "Be praised, my Lord, through our sister bodily death, from whose embrace no living person can escape." How within the creation of an omnipotent and beneficent God, there can be both suffering and love is a mystery to which we will return. For the moment, it's enough to say that Francis seemed to recognize in the very construction of the creation a pattern and purpose within the drama of death. One story, a kind of living parable, suffices to show this. It's said that at a time before his turn to holy poverty, while he was still an extravagant youth, he was walking out of town when he came to a shepherd driving his sheep through the city gates to be sold for slaughter. Francis simply bought the entire flock then and there and brought them back out to the green meadows in the valley where he set them free. Yet, later, in the full flowering of his compassionate soul, when his followers came to ask him if they should serve meat on the feast day of Christmas, he answered yes, without hesitation. On a day like this, even the walls eat meat. This is a very medieval kind of saying. Yes, on a day like this, even the walls eat meat, and if they don't, let them be smeared with meat. It's clear that for Francis, the reality of the redemption was framed within the wider overarching mystery of salvation through the incarnation and crucifixion of Christ. Clearly for Francis, the creation in all its fullness was inseparably material and spiritual, sacramental through and through. This attentive and appreciative disposition toward the multiplicity of natural forms, even the tiniest and seemingly insignificant, may have played an unrecognized role in Western history, together with the affirmation of an ordered and intricately interrelated whole, established and sustained within a pattern of purposeful principle as opposed to the perverse and capricious inclinations of the gods of antiquity. This sense of order, this sense of intricate, interrelated whole, this perspective on the natural world provided the conceptual foundations for the birth of empirical science. The Franciscan Roger Bacon, the first naturalist, is widely acknowledged as the father of experimental science. Moreover, there's Roger Bacon. Moreover, for our current considerations, this Franciscan frame of mind implies some limit on our modern project of biotechnology. Along with a recognition of the fragile interdependence of living nature comes a cautionary concern. We could disrupt the basic balance of being and thereby drain the created order of its beauty, vitality, and evident spiritual significance and profound moral meaning. Likewise, while an appreciation of the special role of each according to its kind allows some latitude in the instrumental use of our fellow creatures, this is not a license for an attitude of arrogance as masters and possessors of nature. For serious purposes, in alignment with the larger gradient of good, plants and animals may be used not as mere raw materials, but with tenderness, compassion, and genuine gratitude. Genetically engineered featherless chickens, here they are, for cheaper pot pies, right? Or leaner pigs with severe arthritis as a product of their genetic engineering. Or maybe even these fluorescent mice. These would somehow seem to be a violation of our basic call to kindness and our sense of courtesy, a concern that Francis extended even to the lowliest of creatures. What has so far been said of Francis regarding nature as a whole is evident in his attitude toward other people as well. He did not so much love humanity, but individual human beings. This is the fullest meaning of what he meant by courtesy, a tender affection and concern for others as precious and unique as creatures beloved of God. G.K. Chesterton, in his beautiful biography of St. Francis, notes that whereas in the manners of the court there is one king and many courtiers, for Francis it was as though there were many kings and one courtier. Francis was the servant of all. This was not a matter of magnanimity or largesse with their implicit sense of superiority, but of genuine humility of heart. He became the little brother, placing himself in a position of neediness before others, not so much a giver of gifts as the giver of giving. Francis provided the invitation to give by putting himself in circumstances that drew forth the generosity and with it the self-respect in others. What a contrast to the brazen and unabashed goals that typify much of our biotechnological project. Notwithstanding the noble intentions and compassionate purposes on which it's built, biotechnology has quickly changed in character, pulled and persuaded by more primary and private purposes, immediate desires and images of personal fulfillment. Within the constraints of the natural world, desires provide directions that motivate and empower purposeful action. Now, in our technological era, they have increasingly become ends in themselves, an imperative of indulgence with all the disproportion and danger that implies. Further inflamed by novel theories such as selfish genes, we are labeled robot vehicles of our biological needs and thereby liberated from the illusion of moral obligation or even the capacity for moral governance, and let loose to the primary pull of our natural inclinations. It's easy to see where this will go in the absence of a higher and more compelling ideal. First, the easy indulgence of our most infantile desires, a series of low-grade satisfactions, what Nietzsche called pitiable comfort, a voluntary trivialization and enfeeblement of soul. Then, more perverse, an uninhibited, technologically potentiated exploration of the basic physiology of pleasure, indulgence in the aesthetics of the self, the direct biochemical mediated equivalent of pornography. We are already somewhat familiar with these degraded manipulations of natural desire in the personal and social tragedy of substance abuse, but it seems likely that our advancing knowledge of neurophysiology and neuropharmacology will deliver far more rarefied and difficult to resist temptations. Beyond the personal tragedy of addiction and its damaging effect on families, a recent study in the National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse at Columbia University estimated that the substance abuse and addiction cost of American citizens alone cost the federal, state, and local governments over $525 billion a year. So we're vulnerable to the pull of these things. Equally troubling are the direct social dangers, the pervasive and open-ended competition with others, where biotechnology is deployed in the service of vanity and pride, or simply the unbridled quest for position or power, building on the principled justification already established in the practice of cosmetic surgery, and I'm not against cosmetic surgery, I think there are good uses for it, but it's setting a paradigm for us. Building on that paradigm in an open-ended and ever-escalating arms race against others, we may seek better babies, more beautiful bodies, and superior performance in the quest for privilege and prestige. Think Lance Armstrong. Finally, and most disturbing, there is at least the possibility that the powers of biotechnology will be deployed by the state in a coercive program of social engineering, all in the name of building a better world. Already, we have examples of mandatory genetic screening and forced abortion, and in other countries, not ours, fortunately. And one only needs to call back to conscience what was done in the name of racial hygiene. It has been said that people who worship health will not remain healthy. But in the depths of our desires, we've always dreamed of something even beyond health. It is the witness of human history that when we elevate our natural inclinations to the level of a guide, when we move along the gradient of desire, simple natural desire, things tend toward disproportion and even perversion. Desires become tyrants. And these disproportions and dangers of desire will be dramatically magnified in our era of biotechnology. Suddenly, one can sense a wisdom in the severity and self-denial that were, for Francis, inseparable from the source of his joy. He had rediscovered an ancient truth in the inversion of desire, not as a negation of being, but as something as positive as a passion. In the image of his Lord, he emptied himself and received back all things, renewed, purified, and restored in their divine glory. In his humility and self-surrender, he became more fully human, more free from temptation and fear, and more free for the fullness of love. Indeed, if Chesterton was correct, his severity of self-denial is most rightly understood as romance, a special dedication and devotion, freely and joyfully given. In the heroic mode of medieval chivalry, it was for Lady Poverty that he laid down his life. All of this suggests something that is far more than a mere technique to balance off the seduction of the senses and the errors of emotion. Rather, it clarifies the fundamental contours of a spiritual anthropology that is a crucial corrective to the naive naturalism that is increasingly employed to describe the human person. Seen in this way, spiritual unity with a divine source and significance is essential for the fullness of human life and its capacity for love. This is not just a comforting cultural overlay, but an indispensable dimension of human flourishing and even human survival. Genuine altruism, self-giving love, is the crucial element necessary to sustain human community and personal peace. This is especially evident wherever it is absent, as in the circumstances of conflict without conciliation, bitterness without forgiveness, and misfortune without mercy. And I think we're seeing it again. If we have any hope of stopping the epidemic of Ebola, we're going to need this kind of love. From an evolutionary perspective, the importance of such acts of altruism is acknowledged and described as a naturally grounded mechanism for sustaining social solidarity and ultimately bringing benefit to the individual. That may be true, and there doesn't have to be anything fundamentally wrong with that. Some, however, will say that any notion of divine love as an element of this capacity is a functional fiction, a projection of the idealizing imagination or sublimation of natural inclination. By this account, the heroic acts of Francis on behalf of Lady Poverty were a displacement of a more fundamental biological psychology. But why should we presume such an ontologic priority? Clearly, Francis was not some kind of biological eccentricity. It's so evident that he got to the very center of human existence. But here the challenge deepens. For however much we may wish to simplify and sanitize the story of St. Francis, as we do with our garden statues and this kind of picture, An honest reading of the historical record brings us face to face with dimensions of his spirituality that are distant and disquieting to the modern mind. The same man that greeted the glory of the dawn sought out the silence and solitude of the cave, and the same hands outstretched in joyous welcome to the little birds bore, according to the testimony of his companions, the very marks of the wounds of Christ. Indeed, Francis had prayed that he would know the pain of the passion of his Lord. He would understand more fully through that, he prayed, that he would understand more fully the depth and meaning of God's love and God's sacrifice for him. Far more than a mere moderation or rebalancing of desire, the spiritual transformation in the life of Francis was a radical realignment of life. Indeed, it was a resonant recognition that the whole of the present disposition of creation, in both its beauty and its suffering, is a drama of sacrifice and redemptive rescue. This understanding of the order of the natural world bears a certain similarity to the picture portrayed by our contemporary evolutionary theory. And in the absence of a coherent spiritual cosmology, it's not hard to recognize the deep source of the pessimism and cynicism of some people in our modern scientific age. It's true, the evolutionary panorama presents the spectacle of unspeakable suffering that is inseparably woven into the entire process of predation and natural catastrophe. A comprehensive picture of the world must face the problem that is posed by such suffering for any notion of transcendent goodness. Jacques Monod spoke of humanity as alone in the unfeeling vastness of the universe. Physicist Steven Weinberg says that the more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. And biologist Michael Gislin, defying the notion of the possibility of genuine altruism, stated, "Scratch an altruist and watch a hypocrite bleed." What a dilemma. Natural embodied creatures, born into a world of struggle and suffering, but with intimations of transcendence. Torn between the pull of pride, the private lures and longings of self-will, and the aspirations of the religious ideal, the fundamental question arises: in whose image are we made? Pascal recognized the full significance of this question, and he warned us that those who sought God apart from Christ, who went no further than nature, would fall into atheism. The natural world, with its strife and struggle, poses a question that it cannot answer. How can there be, ultimately, both suffering and love? Yet with this question, the deepest meaning of the material world is opened to understanding. All of creation and its evolutionary ascent to mind and moral awareness may be recognized as a kind of living language in a drama of the deepest spiritual significance. Through the eyes of faith, the entire cosmic order of time and space and material being may be seen as an arena for the revelation of love, for the creation of a creature capable of ascending to an apprehension of its creator, and more profoundly, for the reaching down the compassionate condescension of love himself. There, within the human form, with its capacity for genuine understanding and empathy, moral truth was revealed in matter. The true image of God was born within a body. In the face of Jesus, was made manifest the face of love, and most specifically in his suffering on the cross. Those who looked upon him felt his pain, yet recognized his righteousness and knew the injustice of his plight. His was the ultimate defining act of altruism. In this, the transcendent was revealed in and through the immanent. Nature and God were reconciled, and the cosmos was restored in its intelligibility. The fullness of love was revealed in human form. In that moment of human history, all of creation was lifted to another level of meaning. All of the evolutionary struggle, the seeming futility of suffering and sacrifice and death itself, was raised to the possibility of participation in a higher order of being. Christian faith is a faith in the God whose very nature is love, an affirmation that reaches beyond all suffering to the ultimate goodness of life. It is here that while decisively denying the pessimism, cynicism, and amoral implications of a purely materialistic psychology, like evolutionary psychology, Christianity may yet at once affirm the reality and positive significance of the material world and its evolutionary process. In the emergence of moral nature and the capacity for genuine spiritual understanding, humanity, as the culmination of creation, is called into communion with the very life of God, the life of love. Torn and tattered, frail and needy, but joyful in the freedom of love, the little brother, Francis of Assisi, provides a startling juxtaposition to the ambitions and appetites driving our images of perfection in this age of biotechnology. As we reflect now on the promise and peril of our new powers over nature and human nature, we would do well to remember an old saying: the first principle of intelligent tinkering is to not throw away any of the parts. We must not be so foolish as to arrogantly ignore the foundations, the natural foundations, that are the very frame of our freedom, nor the treasures of our spiritual traditions that make that freedom truly free. Thank you. All right, well, that was a little unconventional for CCARE.
Actually, we've had a number of, spiritual leaders. Have any of you come to any of those conversations? So some of those have some very profound spiritual and religious traditions. And I think the point of what we do, while it is based in science, it is not to turn our head away from people's beliefs and what gives them sustenance. And for many people, in fact, the majority of people in this world, it is through spirituality and religion that their deepest desires and a sense of transcendence actually occur. And so we honor that, although we are scientists. Maybe we could have some questions for Bill.
I can't quite hear you.
Seems to be driven by, the desire to, gratify animal desires, but doesn't it seem, though, that that's not necessarily the case, that we could precisely seek to transcend our animal nature and become sort of more altruistic and less enslaved to these kind of Darwinian desires through technologically modifying ourselves? You speak so eloquently of a kind of evolutionary progression from animality up to a sort of current human state. Why couldn't we seek to transcend this animal status further through technological modification?
Well, that's a very deep question, and indeed is the crux of a huge dialogue going on now, largely often called bioethics, but actually bioethics is really an existential reflection for the whole human family. By the way, I don't even call myself a bioethicist, even though that's sort of what I do. I don't think it's a real profession. Bioethics is not a profession, but a conversation. And I think of myself as a physician and a citizen trying to figure out what's best to do with the advances in our technology. And indeed, there's a very deep question about how we should operate. The two fundamental starting points for what I understand you to be asking relate to the fact that we do have a natural sense of the imperative of use of our biotechnology, first and most evidently in medicine. But then the question comes up, well, are there uses of interventions that go beyond therapy to somehow the improvement of performance or other possibilities in human nature? And we spent a long time on the President's Council on Bioethics working on this issue, and we issued, along with many other volumes that we produced, I think we did 10 volumes in total, we produced a volume called Beyond Therapy, Biotechnology and the Pursuit of Happiness. And as we reflected on these matters, this, by the way, was a very diverse group of people. It was not a political appointment, and I think, if anything, this was during the Bush administration that this document was produced, and if anything, the council I was on was, I think more people didn't vote for President Bush than did, even though it was portrayed as a partisan council. But in dealing with and struggling with these very profound questions that were important for the whole future of the human family, we all took this very seriously. And one of the things that became most evident was the pursuit of happiness, as conceived by our founding fathers, harkened back more to something of an Aristotelian notion that it was excellence, not just what we would today call fun. But the problem with that I was trying to present is that there are these inclinations to go with the easy flow of things, and they have for all of human history been counteracted by spiritual traditions, spiritual dimensions of culture. But now, in our era, those spiritual traditions are being challenged and altered and in some cases discarded. And I think we need a coherent spiritual cosmology to frame these. I don't think the inclinations of natural desire out of context of spiritual thinking will guide us to good. And let me say this, that the theories of evolutionary psychology make that same affirmation. They say that the capacities for compassion and capacities for altruism are fundamentally part of the whole process of gene sifting and have to redound to the good of the individual. They barely even allow in group selection. So that's the problem.
I definitely agree with you, but maybe to put it in cruder terms, the point I was trying to make is just, I agree with you definitely about how you need a spiritual cosmology and you can't, rely on your natural desires to guide you, but just couldn't technological modification help us overcome our natural desires? Couldn't it make us more altruistic potentially?
That's also a very interesting extension of your question. And there are bioethicists and other, whatever they want to call themselves, people who maintain that we should use our biotechnology to improve our moral nature. And at first, that seems like a good idea. I don't know where this ever played out, but somebody noted that in Texas, of all places, certain towns had higher levels of lithium in the drinking water, and they had lower levels of crime. And so it suggested that we add lithium to the drinking water. Lithium's used in treatment of manic depressive illness and a variety of other psychiatric things. Well, I think the problem I have with that, I obviously have no problem with making people more alert to the possibilities of their moral nature and helping them live a moral life. To some extent, psychiatry and its psychopharmacology does that in aligning us and attuning us to deep, coherent realities if we're sick. But as to the normal person, I'm very reluctant to start tinkering with what we barely understand. I mean, look, we couldn't even figure out the financial system in 2007. So if we started fooling around with our bodies, watch out. Moral nature, I think, it has to do with the deepest level of human integrated identity. And I don't think that it's just tweaking this or that will get us there. I think it comes from what we used to call character development, an understanding of our lives and an operation within the world that teaches us in a deep, deep level who we should be and how to be it.
I guess what I believe about compassion in human nature is that by evolution we do have compassion with or without religion. And so when I hear people like yourself arguing basically that you can't be moral without having a religious belief that goes beyond naive naturalism, as you put it, I think that's not right. And I also think the selfish gene is not right. that by evolution we have come to a point in our brain development where we feel the suffering of others and we react to that. And as a neuroscientist, I'd really like your take on that.
Well, that again is a very interesting question and a very active dialogue now as to what the role of religion is. And let me back out of the specific tradition I was speaking in and speak more broadly to that. I think one could make a case that something like religion is operating in those who you say sustain a sense of compassion. I certainly believe, as Jim said at the beginning, and chime in here, Jim, if you want to, I certainly believe there is strong grounding for a natural capacity for empathy and therefore a sense of compassion. I mean, the word compassion comes from a deeper Latin root that suffering together. It's the same root, by the way, pati, that is the root of our word patient. And to suffer together with somebody is a natural capacity in human nature. How deep it goes in the face of genuine threat to self, genuine loss of benefit to the self is a challenging question. I was a participant in what became, because of the New York Times article on it, a rather famous conference called Beyond Belief. It was down in San Diego, and it was organized, and it brought together all of what are called now the new atheists, you know, Stephen Weisberg, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Larry Krauss, a bunch of people, very smart people, and I thought very nice people too, indeed. I really like Neil Tyson. He's the guy at the Hayden Planetarium. And it was a small group, so I got to know people over the 3 days of the conference. And what impressed me about it was that how they could stand up in together and speak in just basically powerful sense of awe and what I would call reverence for the nature of the material world as they saw it. And boy, I really agreed with that. So what is it that separates that kind of an individual from one who looks at the world and says, you know, I feel your pain, but I don't care. And there are people like that. I know, and Sam Harris kept saying over and over what a bad thing religion is. And no doubt, we're watching some of it happen in the world as we speak today. And so I know that religion can be, I think, the worst and the best of humanity at once. Having said that, I think that to really engage in what I would call genuine altruism, one has to have some kind of a metaphysic or a cosmology that sees the point of it, that agrees to it, not just reflexively and not just emotionally, but cognitively as well. I think, maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's...
What about social contract? I mean, just realizing that there are others and that they need help, and that there's karma in the sense that can come back and does.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I would like it if people felt that way too, but there seem to me to be some people on Wall Street that don't get it. And I you know, I'm not trying to be sarcastic about it. I would think everybody could see that, at least at some level. But it seems that what human beings are quite good at joining the Chamber of Commerce and, you know, doing works of evident altruism while they, you know, get what they want on the side. I'm sorry to say that. I'm not trying to be cynical about human nature. I think human nature is a strange mix of instincts, impressions, rationalizations, desires. In the final end, I think my own feeling, having struggled with that very question for years and years, is that we do need to be rooted in some convictions of higher principle and purpose in the universe. What did you say?
I said just to comment and sort of act as a bounce back from that. So I have no conviction. I have no belief in a God. I'm an atheist. I have no belief beyond anything that's beyond this moment, being present, if you will. And generally speaking, I think I'm a fairly nice guy. So, you know, the other aspect is that you mentioned sort of this Darwinian view, and the Darwinian view you talk about is not what Darwin talked about. You know, Darwin said, in fact, that it is the survival of the most sympathetic, meaning the most kind, and that has been shown by science to, in fact, be the case. It is the survival of the most cooperative, not the most ruthless. And that will ultimately play out in our species, or not. So I don't have any belief that you necessarily need anything other than a recognition of being in this world, and you can choose, as you point out, to be like some of our colleagues on Wall Street or in the financial markets who have no concern for anybody but themselves. But when you start examining, you know, the root cause of some of these, and let's say go back to neuroscience, and you understand how people develop and how people are tribal, which is an evolutionary aspect of who we are, and we still have this reptilian part of our brain, which is the flight or fight mechanism, where we have natural inclinations to fear what is unknown or what we don't understand, and those have been with us because they have allowed for our species to survive to where we are today. Unfortunately, evolution is not perfection, as we all know. Evolution is approximation of what we need to be here and to make it. And you have these other parts of that which aren't necessarily in our best interest, which is this tribalism, which we seem to always sink back to when we are in fear or there's a scarcity of resources. But you also see that repeatedly people who have either no belief system, no necessarily higher purpose, or don't even think about some of these existential issues, respond at the deepest level of care, concern, and compassion when they see other people in need or who are suffering. And certainly we also see this, I won't say in lower mammalian species, because we're the only species that kills for no reason, so I don't think we are higher than other species, but certainly...
Dolphins kill for no reason.
Okay, well, Perhaps. I don't have great familiarity with dolphin culture, but perhaps you do. But yes, there may be other ones. But my point is that there are a lot of species that demonstrate compassion, kindness, and caring, and at least I'm not aware that they have a set of religious beliefs that gives them some moral direction either.
Well, let me respond to that. First of all, I completely agree with it, that you're a nice guy. So no question on that. I'm not sure I agree with that you have no higher principles or grounding of faith, because I know you somewhat, to the degree that I am always impressed that you are somehow framed with a cosmology that's rich in principle, and that these things don't just create themselves moment by moment, where you say, well, I'll be compassionate now, I'll be compassionate now. They're within a frame of large purpose that you see life being for. And as for the other creatures, I didn't mean to imply, in saying we were the culmination of a process of evolution, that we were somehow, I said earlier that the other creatures, for Francis anyway, were very precious. And they should be for us. I mean, if anything, we should see ourselves as the trustees of the trustees of an estate called the Earth, where we have a compassionate stewardship. But I do not believe that other creatures have that moral choice that you would call genuine compassion. Yes, they have compassion in the sense that they feel with, for sure. Occasionally there are amazing, you can find them on the internet, you can see cases where a lioness has taken on an abandoned baby antelope and nurtured it, at least for a while. I don't know if she ultimately ate it or not, but
She wanted to fatten it up.
yeah, but I don't think it's the same. I think human beings have a moral mind that is not paralleled by any other creature. And I had very interesting conversations. I was at a week-long conference with Jane Goodall some years ago. I had long conversations with her about all this. And she, by the way, told me that chimps will kill for just the sheer fun of it. And she also had many interesting things to say about the difference between human beings and other primates. I think it's our special place in creation to have a spiritual moral awareness that other creatures don't have.
Well, getting to that point, though, which is interesting, because if you point out the dolphin example and the chimp kill arbitrarily, yet at the same time they also display, if you will, what you could call a moral framework, at least in the context of caring for another. I mean, there are numerous examples of animals within their own species actually even sacrificing themselves in some instances for others of their species. So the same that then is playing out within the human species is also playing out there. Now, I agree with you. It doesn't seem as though they have the ability, certainly, to control their environment like we do. And that certainly separates us, I think, or to destroy our environment.
So when I was with Jane Goodall, I noticed that every day at this meeting was at UNICEF, and the cafeteria was on the 7th floor. So every day, while everybody else took the elevator, Jane and I walked up the stairs. It was both energy efficient and gave us an appetite. And we used to eat together. And I noticed that she was a vegetarian, so we started talking about this, and I told her, well, the philosopher David Hume said that he tried being a vegetarian for a while, and then he noticed that big fish eat little fish, so why shouldn't I eat fish? And Jane Goodall said to me, well, by that logic, I should be eating little people. I thought it was funny. But I think when we do an act of sacrifice, I think it's very different than the so-called acts of sacrifice for animals. I mean, there's something compelling and noble about the way a mother animal will protect her offspring and sometimes engage in things that seem to be for the genuine good of others. But I think what's operating in people like that Dr. Kent Brantley, the guy who got Ebola and then refused to take the the medicine to give it to his colleagues and then came back. I mean, there's something very noble about that I don't think you would expect in an animal. At least that's the way I see it.
Well, we haven't seen that particularly noble animal. I mean, there may be one, right?
Well, maybe. I don't think they have other animals have the cognitive structure for that kind of analysis that.
Well, but as she gave the example of the chimp who, let's say, might intentionally kill somebody, I would have to suspect that if you look at the bell-shaped curve of behavior of animals, that there may be that one who may be representative within our species of a sociopath or psychopath. There's probably one who's excessively kind and deeply feels when that animal sees suffering. And in fact, this may be the explanation for the example you just gave of a lion caring for an antelope or a lamb or some of these other extreme examples of behavior.
Well, I should have let you answer that. I was asking about natural compassion then, because what you're saying is within our species there's this bell-shaped curve of instinct for compassion. But what can bring us all then up to the level of compassion, if not some kind of broader understanding of what we're doing here? I mean, I think most people, if you really get down to it, most people believe life is about love, right?
She has the answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that, first of all, thank you both. You're very brilliant for not being PhDs or just and analyzing but I think you both need to get out of the box, because you get in the mode so much of just appraising, researching, that you're not seeing fundamentally what this is all about, and it's experiencing. Whether you believe in God, I'm universal, so I have no.
Are you a universal Unitarian?
I'm just universal. I feel like there's, whether you call it higher power, or it's Christ, or it's Buddha, whoever it is, we have access to these energies and frequencies, and not everyone can access it right away, but there are those of us who are learning to do this through meditation, through feeling and being, as Dalai Lama, you well know.
I heard of it.
Yes, but you, who I think are great, but you just haven't experienced it. And until people experience, have these, look, I'm married to a man who hasn't experienced it, and I experience all the time.
That must be an interesting dialogue.
It is, and he just wrote a book about it. A healer married to a Stanford graduate, undergraduate, married to a lawyer, a thinker, very much an academic.
Well, I would argue with you, because I think both Bill and myself have had extraordinarily deep experiences on an experiential level that certainly could contrast with some of those of the saints or of other.
More for him.
Well,
Can you give us one?
pardon?
Can you give us one? Share one?
Sure. When my father passed away, he was quite ill, and I unfortunately was not in a position where I could go to him, and I was informed he had a little time to live, and I was woken up in the middle of the night by my father, who was at the end of my bed, and who apologized for certain transgressions and said he had to leave, and told me he loved me. So
you
question.
believe in...
No, I don't believe in anything. I believe that experience occurred.
What was
I
that?
believe that experience occurred. Did it have an emotional impact? Yes. The explanation of it, unclear. I had a near-death experience when I was in my training. Unfortunately, I was involved in a car accident, almost died. Had a back fracture, was paralyzed, lost bowel and bladder function, had a transected small bowel, fractured spleen. Went to the emergency room, had to go to emergency surgery. The chief of the surgery department who operated on me missed a bleeder. I went into shock. I left my body, was up in the corner of the room. watched this argument between my chief and him, and about, because he wouldn't, his ego structure was such he could not possibly admit that he messed the bleeders, my blood pressure is going lower. Anyway, they took me back to surgery, went in my body, then I had the experience of going down a river, bright light at the end, connecting with this incredibly warm, blah, 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 blah. And so what was that, right?
So what was that? Is it an explanation for the expansion of consciousness, and how does that relate to compassion?
Well, my point is that people seek an explanation for these types of events. And you're talking about experience. I certainly had the experience of the event, but I don't need to attribute it to something extraordinary. And it doesn't change my view of kindness, compassion, having an open heart, or connecting with people in general. It just has zero.
How about Larry Dossey?
What about him?
How about his presentations Beyond Prayer and all of his books, Beyond
Again,
This?
look,
What does,
you know, a 5-year-old can write a book about heaven, right? And has. If people want to believe that, listen, I'm all for anything that will give people something to grab onto that gives them a sense of safety, security, purpose, meaning, and if you will, transcendence, and gives them a framework to lead a life of service to others. I'm all for it, and whatever it is. In fact, I tell the people who work with me, because there is a tendency within what we do, where we develop this compassion cultivation training, it's very Buddhist-centric, right? Because it's based on Tibetan Buddhist practice. And I will tell some of my people who work with me, who are very strong Buddhists, I said, look, I don't care if this comes from Scientology, the Book of Mormon, or from an alien product. If it works and gives people meaning, great, I'm all for it. It's irrelevant.
I agree with you, Dr. Day, but I feel like I'm talking to my husband here. What if you experienced heaven? I mean, you've experienced...
I experience heaven every day. I'm with you today. This is heaven. Yes, sir.
You know, you referenced something very, very thoughtful and profound about the question of where we all came from. I mean, I have about as good a educational background in science as one can buy or whatever you get. And what strikes me about the scientific description of the cosmos is two things. One, how vast and mysterious it remains. And two, that it does, in spite of what people say about the negative manifestations of this idea, it still seems apparent that there is some kind of grand narrative or some purposefulness going on in the cosmos. I mean, it's clear to me there's a trajectory across the process of evolution where there's an increasing breadth of comprehension and control by different species, culminating in our species as having unique capacity to intervene within nature, but also capacity to see larger purposes within the process. I think most people, feeling people, which we all are, some of us in academia get a little buried in ratiocination, but most of us really do feel. I mean, evolutionary psychologists wouldn't wish their theory on their children. You know, there's a saying, evolutionary psychologists are okay, but you never should let your daughter marry one. You know, so the real thing that most feeling people feel is that there's some purpose to their lives and some deep, rich mystery operating around them. And I presented the perspective of my personal journey, which involved a very deep engagement with the story of St. Francis. I heard about St. Francis just through Kenneth Clark's series called Civilization. And I was a medical student here at the time. And so I started reading about St. Francis. And then a week after I graduated from medical school, my first child was born. And they made a mistake in delivery. It was really very, very tragic mistake. And she suffered very bad brain damage. And suddenly all of this all of what I read about Frances came back to me, and I was hoping, I remember driving home from the hospital in the early morning. My baby was a breech baby, and another woman was bleeding to death, and they left my wife and baby unattended for 45 minutes, came back and did the necessary procedure to save her, but they didn't get her heart beating for 9 minutes, but she did live. And she did amazingly well considering all that, his background. But I remember driving home from the hospital in the early dawn, tears coming down my face, and thinking to myself, I hope, for the sake of my little girl, that there will be people out there like St. Francis who won't judge her because she's not going to be cognitively powerful. I was the 12th member of my family to graduate from Stanford. We now have 18. But I knew that the most important thing for her was that somebody had that heart, that spirit of acceptance at the very deep level of her humanity, because she wasn't going to get human acceptance on her performance or her, she's pretty, but it's different than that. I mean, we needed basic love for that. I mean, I think the universe is about something, and I realized very quickly when little Sarah was born that this was an invitation to go deeper into the heart of life. This was a kind of education I could never pay for, and that my science would never, in and of itself, give me. But even my science and everything that I am is a convergence of all these things, the knowledge and I mean, you look what you just heard from Jim. You heard about an experience of the presence of his father and a near-death experience. And I have no way of analyzing, and don't even want to analyze those experiences. I listen to them and hear them. But that's a neurosurgeon you're hearing. Imagine that. At Stanford Medical School. You're no logical positivist, that's for sure. This is a mysterious realm we're in. And I think we all ought to, with humility, recognize there may be a source and significance to the universe. And we may not know it until we live in it, and especially until we suffer in it and we experience the compassion of others in it. Should we take that question?
Sure.
Do you oppose human embryonic genetic engineering? And if so, would you support a legislation against it? Or alternatively, would you support a mechanism of taxation such that humans being how they are, that they would pursue perfection with their children? A mechanism of taxation that would tax that process in order to support those children who are born with genetic defects.
You know, when we were appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics, my appointment came at the end of 2001. And you all may remember that up until 9/11, the really conflicted issue in our nation was embryonic stem cell research. And our council was announced, the formation of the council was announced in that August 9th, 2001 speech that President Bush gave, his first address to the nation, and in which he allowed federal funding. And by the way, the issue was entirely about federal funding, not about what you could and couldn't do with your own money or state money or anything else. It was about whether the taxpayers of the United States collectively ought to support this kind of embryo research that would involve the sacrifice of more embryos to get more stem cell lines. That was the issue. President Bush said they could use the existing lines, but not create others. So when we met with the president some months later, first time, it was fun. I have to admit, I flew into Washington and as my habit is to go running every afternoon. I was on the soccer team at Stanford, so I just couldn't quit running. And I ran down around the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, and I thought, boy, this is exciting. I'm going to be involved as one of 18 people in some of the most profound issues of our age. And then the next morning we met, and in the afternoon we went over to the White House and went into the the Roosevelt Room, which is on the West Wing. And when we were assembled, standing up and around the room, President Bush came in, and he went around and he shook each person's hand, and I sort of hung back. I'm not a very political kind of guy, so I just sort of hung back, and finally he came to me, and I thought, well, the courteous thing would be to tell him my name. So I said, I'm Bill Hurlbut from Stanford. And he looked me right in the eye and he said, I know you who you are, Bill. I thought, wow, a politician, amazing. So we met with him, and I know there are varied views of President Bush, but I have to say, I felt like he recognized that these were issues that went way beyond his capacity for political discernment. I mean, President Obama said something similar when he said the embryo issue is beyond his pay grade. These are very hard issues, and I'm not a political scientist, so I wouldn't want to designate what laws should and shouldn't be the case. But in the interest of integrity and in the interest of alienating everybody in the room, I will tell you that I entered medical school and was, I was one of those guys that smoked a lot of dope and did the same stuff that my generation did. And I had all sorts of ideas about what was and wasn't. And I was fine with abortion until I went in and I scrubbed in on what was labeled a tumor, but was in fact a side. They used to do abortions by labeling something else. And I knew the doctor very well. And it was a suction abortion, which is, you do that about 14, 16 weeks out, because the fetus is too big to just pull out with a D&C, dilatation and curettage. So the suction device pulls the embryonic remains through a tube, and the doctor or the surgical nurse, somebody has to lay them out take them out of the suction jar and lay them out on a cloth, and make sure you got them all out, because you can't leave an arm or a leg in there, because that's very dangerous for the woman. She might have an infection, necrotic tissue, and become sterile. So he stood in front of me so that I couldn't see what he was doing, because he knew I'd been struggling with this question of, all sorts of questions about what's right and wrong in medicine and so forth, and anybody in that stage was doing it. Abortion was a big controversy then. And so he came over and he opened my hand. He went over the water faucet, he did something, and he came over and he opened my hand and he plunked into my hand the little trunk of the fetus that had been aborted. And it had, the legs and the arms had been ripped off, but there was a little tiny rib cage, a little pelvis, a little spine, and I looked at this thing in my hand. It was about this long. And tears just welled up in my eyes, right in front of the surgical nurses. They're hard-boiled. Sorry if you're a surgical nurse. Tears just welled up in my eyes. I mean, I knew there'd been a death of a human being. And so I, as a physician, have been against abortion ever since then. And I'm about the only person at Stanford who will stand up and say that. There are others, but they don't want to talk about it. And I'm stupid maybe, but I don't care. I'm against it. I'm against it. I'm not at all unsympathetic to the problems that lead to people to want to have abortions. It's just that I believe we should answer all of our problems with more love, not less love. And so I believe that life begins at the beginning of the initiation of sperm and egg, and that's a different stage, the early stages of a human life. And for that reason, whatever we do, this is a long way of answering your question, but it's maybe the right way to answer it. I believe that what we do is we find creative ways to solve these problems. I mean, if we can solve people from getting bad genetic diseases, I'm for it. But I'm not for it if it involves the intentional creation and destruction of human embryos. I think that's a place we don't want to go, because it will not stop at the blastocyst stage. It will not necessarily stop even at implantation. It will lead us on a path that we will regret someday. And probably we're in equipoise in the United States. We probably won't go there. But there are other places that will go there. And if you look at the science of this, you will see that there's every reason to believe that it would be more therapeutically and scientifically valuable if we could just give up on the notion of the humanity of the fetus and do the kind of gene knockouts, knock-ins, whatever we wanted to do to study development, gestate fetuses part way and take their parts for transplantation. It's possible to take fetal organs and transplant them. They've done it with cows. And they've taken kidneys and produced useful urine-producing units. And I just don't think we want to go there. So the answer to your question is, if we can do good without degrading the very humanity we're trying to heal, then I'm in favor of it. And we can find creative ways to do all of these things. I'm pretty convinced. But let me read you a quote from Mother Teresa. "I feel the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion, because it is the war against the child, direct killing of the innocent child. And if we can accept that a mother can kill even her own child, how can we tell other people not to kill one another? How do we persuade a woman not to have an abortion? As always, we must persuade her with love. And we remind ourselves that love means to be willing to give until it hurts."
And I think that's the fundamental failure of our society, is few people give until it hurts. You look at the fact that 1.5% of the population in the United States controls 41.5% of the wealth. So the rest, the other 98.5% of the population, I mean, it's extraordinary. That is where there should be the giving until it hurts. And if those individuals did, if we had a fair, equitable system, everyone would be fed, everyone would have a free education, and it would be easy to love, wouldn't it? Okay, on that note, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions.
Thank you.
Bill.